Good afternoon and welcome to today's discussion. I'm Eva Maidel, a member of the European Parliament, and I'm very glad to be able to organize and also host today's discussion on cybersecurity. Thank you everyone for joining us. Together with my team, we are eager to bring this discussion to a broader circle of interested stakeholders for a number of reasons. So before we actually start the discussion with our panelists, let me touch upon a couple of the points of why we wanted to have today's meeting and this roundtable. A little bit over a year, the world was brought to a halt by the COVID-19 pandemic, during which we witnessed, I can say, still witnessing also an infodemic with regards to the virus itself, but of course, not only. We have seen that also the pandemic brought a global shift to remote and to hybrid work, while in the same time it forced organizations to reinvent the way they operate practically overnight, and with most of them with very little preparation whatsoever. So this new reinforced online environment has given this excellent ground and opportunity to cyber criminals to spread their malicious efforts. In fact, the main and large-scale cyber attacks that have taken place lately, both in the US and Europe, such as SolarWinds or Colonial Pipeline or AXA in France, or the attack against the Irish healthcare system, are clear proof that both Europe and the US vulnerabilities on their digital territories are able to be exploited by malicious third parties. This simply demonstrates the unprecedented scale that those cybercrime groups and also foreign states attached to our digital infrastructure, but also our institutions, our businesses, our citizens and societies as a whole. And this is why Europe has to have a very clear and a very robust answer, while in the same time it ensures a very strong European cybersecurity and defense, technological know-how for countering such attacks, and also, importantly, high level of cyber resilience through prepared and skilled professionals. This is why the NIS directive has to be a priority, a constant instrument in a way in our toolbox in order for us to make sure we have a free but also protected digital future within the European Union. I don't think we can allow this sort of malicious large-scale cyber incidents to become the new norm. This cannot be by any means the right path for us ahead. And this is why it's key that we improve coordination, that we excel in cyber skills at any level, and in the same time improve capacities and resilience to those cyber attacks. I am EPP Group Rapporteur on the revised NIS directive. And I have to say that I feel the weight of the work ahead of us, but I'm also very glad to be part of this European team that is working to improve the EU cybersecurity, but also looking into how to cooperate with our allies. And as we are currently drafting our amendments in the Parliament, for me it would be very important to hear the invited expert speakers today who are joining us, as well as afterwards to hear from the participants. So without any further delay, I would like to give a start to the discussion with our distinguished guests today. But first of all, let me present who they are. And once you see them on the screen, we will kick off with a couple of opening statements and questions. I will ask a little bit more afterwards, perhaps the participants, and come back to them with a round two of questions. And then we'll open the floor for the rest of the participants to pose their questions and to come come in. So I'm very happy to welcome Jakub Boratinsky from the European Commission, who is head of unit of cybersecurity and digital privacy from DG Connect. Welcome, Jakub. Also, Johan Lepasar, the executive director of NIS2, the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity. Glad to see you, Juha. Thank you for joining us. And we are also joined by Chris Grow, Senior Director and Head of EU Public Policy at Cisco. Thank you all very much for being here together with us. As we have just about a little bit over an hour, and I am sure, just like myself, many others would like to pick on various questions. I would like to start with Jakub, because you have been, that's your sphere of expertise. You know the proposal, extremely well is an understatement, I would say. But I'm sure there's also perhaps, people in this audience that are also very familiar with the proposal, and others maybe that are not so familiar. And as this is a core priority of the Commission, and also it was in the previous mandate, this digital transformation of Europe, and we know this will not happen overnight, as things like trust and capacity need to be built among member states, between local and international entities, between partners. So could you please shed a little bit more light? We have already have the foundation of the NIS2, so to say, proposal and directive late for this sort of capacity building to be established. So how is the new proposal building on top of that? Just for a few minutes, so that we can have a little bit more of an interactive discussion and bring in the other speakers. Jakub.
Good afternoon. Thanks a lot, Eva, for this invitation. It's a great pleasure indeed to be here in such a distinguished company. And again, it's really great time to talk about it. We have NIS2 discussions, let's say, accelerating, and regrettably also we had indeed big cybersecurity incidents, which actually made us indeed fully aware what's at stake. And you mentioned the fact that the trust building of the trust is something that takes time. I think that has been on a good and bad side our collective experience. And good because it's good, but of course the fact is that this trust actually is also was conditioning what could be seen as a fairly slow progress, especially in the beginning. I think it's good to realize that what we have now on the table, I mean not what we have on the table, the NIS1 that is implemented and put in place is a reflection of a reality back then. I mean the Commission made this proposal in the beginning of 2013, and I think we have managed to achieve a lot, probably even beyond what was in the letter of the NIS directive, because the fact that we managed to create these mechanisms for cooperation between member states, even though it is almost on a purely voluntary basis, indeed was a vehicle for trust building that allowed notably to work together on such a sensitive topic like 5G security. Now, looking into what needs to be improved, what kind of gaps needs to be addressed, I mean, it was one of the, let's say, essential drivers for coming up with this new proposal. One thing that is pretty obvious is that, we started, I would say, modestly, humbly, with basically focusing on traditional critical sectors. Fairly small pool of companies across Europe. The number of operators of essential services, if we take some, let's say, outliers, we are basically talking at most about several thousand companies all over Europe. Now, with experience of COVID and, of course, the fact that we are in a really different place with digitalization, we are indeed expanding the scope considerably. Our estimate talks about, and ultimately probably over 100,000 companies that would be in the scope. At the same time, we are quite attached to the principle of actually not dictating, not prescribing too much the companies what they need to do, because they ultimately are the owners of the risk and they need to make the right choices. In terms of in terms of member state capabilities, I think indeed a lot has happened. An element of working on capabilities across Europe was, of course, also Cybersecurity Act with the renewed mandate for ENISA. But we are indeed bringing in some, new ideas. We will have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure policy. We put a lot of emphasis on supply chain security, not only from the point of view of the companies, but also how authorities at a national level and how we collectively at European level can actually support, again, the owners of the risk down in the chain in making, the right choices. I think there is a very important element of principle in the NIS2. We definitely had a very divergent implementation. Part of the compromise in NIS1 was that member states had a quite large room of maneuver in terms of how to transpose the directive, including the choice of companies ultimately in the scope. So we are indeed making quite a leap forward in terms of streamlining the obligations for companies, and also in terms of incident notifications. We hope that the ultimate result would be diminished burden from the point of view of not having, especially for the companies operating in different national markets in Europe, not being really doing quite different things depending on the jurisdiction where they are. Well, these are some of the ideas, and key elements of the new proposal. I, of course, having primarily looked to the ideas of the rapporteur of the Parliament, we definitely see the drive raising, let's say, the level of ambition. If I could just pick up, this idea of, doing more for SMEs, I would say makes a lot of sense. We do put a lot of emphasis actually in the directive, not just on obligations, but also on different measures that can, empower, help, facilitate different types of voluntary cooperation and information sharing. I mean, at the same time, we see that there are some concerns about possible over-reporting. Again, this has not been experienced so much. But again, I don't want to now dive into details. We have quite, weeks and months ahead, to discuss all of this. Again, thanks a lot for this opportunity. I give floor back to you, Eva. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kuba. Indeed, I would agree that we are having an ambitious proposal, which in order to be brought forward and actually to make sense once it has to be implemented, I would say it would be the strong cooperation, coordination, but also communication between the various actors. And I think here is where we could see an enhanced role of ENISA. And Johan, in the recent years, we have seen that ENISA is kind of in the spotlight when it comes to digital talk, and especially after the update mandate of the agency. So what do you see, where does ENISA's role kind of can help this creation of increased cyber resilience in this new proposal, Johan?
Thank you very much. Thanks for organizing also this roundtable and for inviting me to present the views of the agency on this. Of course, one thing that we see is that ENISA as an agency has existed for 15 years, whereas the NIS directive has been enforced only since 2018. And of course, the member states, when it comes to their cyber capabilities, I mean, they of course started much sooner. So we have a bit of I would say a mismatch regarding the framework at the European level and the real stuff that happens on the ground. And I think the NIS2 is now an attempt to catch up. And I would definitely endorse this. The agency has played quite a central role in helping the member states to implement the NIS framework, to better also understand what this, the basic concept of the risk management in cybersecurity means in practice for the essential service providers. What would it mean in terms of developing one's national cybersecurity strategies, which is also an element that the NIS brought in. There were member states before, of course, who had dedicated cybersecurity strategies, but there were those as well that didn't have it. So now we are in the framework where every member state, every single member state, has a national strategy in order to deal with capacities, in order to guide how to develop much more mature and resilient cyberspace. So I think it's very important that we have these elements in place. However, one thing that I would like to bring in mind is that when we talk about cybersecurity, we always talk about the future. We need to prepare for what is beyond today. And the big question, of course, for me is that whether we manage to capture the future also in the new proposal or not. And I just bring you one example. When the NIS, the first Network Information Security Directive proposal was discussed, the concepts, the key issues were probably, I mean, Kuba knows it much better than I do, but they were really put in place in 2012. And the directive itself, as I mentioned, came into effect 2018. So now we are putting in place the key concepts, but we are discussing it in our time. But what we should discuss is how these key concepts will stand the test of time in 5 years or 10 years time. And I think the first NIS was very good because it touched upon the basic elements. It's the basic drive of what is the minimum that is required. But now we should also go beyond it and say, what potentially are the areas that we need to tackle in the future. So I think when we look at the threat landscape, this is no surprise. There will be more cyber incidents. Everybody will need to deal with them. There will be more consequences, more impactful consequences. That's what we have seen. So that means that the responsibility of not only essential service providers or SMEs, any kind of an actor within an internal market, be it a service provider, be it a producer of a product, or be it even a customer, they need to be more empowered, more, I would say, responsible in their behavior. And the level that we are today is not enough in order to deal with the future that waits us. So I think, and of course, the agency is there to help and guide and make sure that we can assist. But eventually, we have only so many tools in our toolbox. Certification is one of these tools, and we are very happy to have it and something that we can develop. But this certification element cannot be an outside of the NIS framework as well. I mean, we need to also see what are the interaction between the certification framework and the NIS framework. So I think these things we need to debate, and hence the panel today and the opportunity to discuss these things is very pertinent now. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Johan. I mean, indeed, when we speak about how to better prepare ourselves, how to build a better capacity building and support, how to make sure that there is enough information exchange and flows, we're indeed talking about the preparedness and readiness of the whole ecosystem. And I would like to bring Chris now. Chris, you represent Cisco. Cisco is one of those companies where you emphasize a lot on cyber awareness, on the increase of the necessity to increase cyber skills for jobs. But you also provide, of course, equipment and high-tech services to both public but also private entities. And I think some of those aspects indeed do combine, what's at the very core to have a strong and efficient cybersecurity, where people are better prepared, but we also have secured products. So how do you see the proposed updates for the European cybersecurity rules in terms of further developing the cyber capacity of entities within the cybersecurity ecosystem in particular? And also, what are your thoughts from being part of that ecosystem them? And how can we make sure that there are more actors in the ecosystem that are better prepared than they currently are, as Johan was mentioning?
Thanks, Eva, for that very kind introduction of Cisco. Obviously, don't need to do the job of selling us now that you already have. I think our first impression when we look at NIS2 is that it's an evolution, right? Not a revolution. And I mean that in a good way. But what you see is that a lot of the core elements stay the same from NIS1 and carry through to NIS2. So if you look on the public sector side or the public authorities, you have the core elements of institution building, international cooperation and building on what was done before, preparedness and strategy. And then for us in the private sector, you have the security requirements which are there, you have incident reporting, and you have oversight. So when we look at it, the real difference, and I do want to give a little bit of credit to what Kuba said around coordinated vulnerability disclosure and supply chain, which are very interesting elements, but the really big difference is in terms of scope, right? And it's the point that Kuba made that we might have been going from several thousand to 100,000 companies, which are caught under it now. And for us, it makes sense to do that reevaluation. We look at it and say, okay, times are different. Our understanding of what critical infrastructure is different. Our understanding of where technology plays a role within critical infrastructure is a different time too. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. The second is in terms of the lessons we can learn from this one, and as we look at this and as they carry through to NIS2. So for us, we were there underneath NIS1 already. We were one of those several thousand companies. And we're there because we're a cloud service provider, right? I mean, we actually have 90 SaaS offers. At the same time, we're also there because our customers are there. So we have a lot of customers for our products across the critical infrastructure sectors, and that leads to flow down requirements. So we've kind of seen both sides of the picture in NIS1. And actually, for us as the cloud providers, the most important document for us in NIS1 wasn't the directive. It wasn't the implementing act. It was actually something that your agency created, Johan, which was technical guidelines on how to implement the security measures for digital service providers, which was the lingo from the NIS1, but basically included the cloud service providers. And that's because it was practical. It basically took the security objectives and mapped those against international standards that we all knew, like ISO 27001, like the NIS Cybersecurity framework, or like Germany's C5, right? That's something we understood, and it's something that our customers understood. And it was something that worked because for the DSPs, for the cloud service providers, this was harmonized, right? We knew that this was centrally directed what measures we would need to meet. Now, when we look on the other side on what was then called the operators of essential service, and now maybe you want to call them more the essential entities, honestly, it's a free-for-all still, right? The member states decide what security measures they want to put in place, which standards they think reflect that, and that's something that we look to meet in the flow down through to us. For a company like ours, where you're operating across multiple sectors, and in 27 member states, and you've got 90 cloud services, you've got another 600 product lines, which might have some security elements built into those. It's difficult to get a hold of that and to convert that into a meaningful process for your product development. So I think we need to learn that lesson and bring that across for NIS2. And for us, we do think that the tools are there in NIS2. I mean, you see there is a phrase which is there which gives room for NISA to give advice or guidance. We see the article which is there about the cybersecurity certification framework. And to your point, Johan, I think those certifications do need to be bound within the NIS2 framework. But what it's really going to take is discipline in following that through, because there is still room for maneuver after the adoption of the directive and in the way that's put into place. And frankly, Johan, I'm really looking at you to make sure that you keep everyone in line, and Kuba, that we can try and make sure that there's a consistent approach from the member states.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and everyone. I have just a few more short questions to all of you, but in the meantime, I would like to encourage our audience to also post their questions in the chat, and we'll get to them shortly. For a moment, maybe we can, Kuba, think a little bit outside of the actual proposal that we've been discussing right now. And maybe you could give me a little bit more your opinion on the cybersecurity strategy that was presented together with the proposal. I mean, there one could see that we also talk about defense and cyber diplomacy, industry, Internet of Things. One could describe it as an ambitious but also visionary strategy, referring to what Johan was saying, with us having, you know, the mindset of thinking ahead of what could happen and how could we be better prepared. But Kuba, what would be your, so to say, three top current future initiatives, which would be they, why would be they in that field, taking inspiration by the strategy that was presented? You're muted, Kuba. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Okay. Thanks a lot. Actually, quite a challenging question to choose three items of this plethora of initiatives. But okay, things that are maybe closer to me, so it's not objective, you know. So the first one is indeed, you know, absolutely fundamental issue, the security of products, of connected objects. I think in the strategy we make a very serious commitment that we will basically examine this issue thoroughly in view of possible, you know, horizontal rules on cybersecurity requirements. And I think you are aware we started that preparatory work. You know, this is in a way in open. It builds also on such initiatives like DG GROW work on RED delegated act. So I would say, again, sounds super technical, but I think this is in a way an area that we have not been really paying enough attention. There was a lot of focus on member state capabilities, on users' responsibilities, companies, but indeed responsibility of providers of cybersecurity solutions, of vendors of ICT in general. I think this is a big area where we have to do more, and cybersecurity certification framework can be seen as a first step, but that's not enough. I mean, especially that of the way it is constructed is a voluntary system. Secondly, you know, yes, I think JCU, I mean, more I work on it, more I believe in it, you know, in a way. So the idea is very simple. It was in a way from the very beginning of EU thinking about cybersecurity that cybersecurity has very different domains. There is always a risk of a silo approach, because we have law enforcement angle, we have obviously national security angle, intelligence angle, economical angle, industrial, etc., etc. And of course, the challenges, you know, do require collaboration across the silos. I think the idea of JCU is actually how we can bring different communities together in response to major cybersecurity crises and large-scale incidents. So we gave some elements in the strategy, and hopefully very soon we come with the second step, which would be this more precise timeline and specific tasks. It's a vision for JCU, but in any case, this is just, it is also a process, because it is not that we land this initiative on the table as such. We will engage with member states and other stakeholders to actually develop it further together. Maybe I stop on this too, not to give any further preferences, and back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, indeed. I realize that this question perhaps puts you in a little bit of an uncomfortable position to kind of pick and choose. But thanks for sharing those thoughts with us. I also think that when we speak about tech in general, but of course now in particular cybersecurity, apart from cooperating within the member states and applying the same type of rules, we also have to do so with our transatlantic partners. And so, Chris, perhaps you could give us your opinion of, you know, apart from the regulations, the regulation that we are now discussing, what else can we do? What sort of common ground with the US we could explore, where we could cooperate further in order to support our system to be better prepared, more resilient. Would that be in the newly proposed, so to say, board on tech and trade, so to say? Do you have any thoughts? Because I believe we cannot be doing all that in a closed environment. Some of the major attacks we've mentioned have happened both on US soil and European soil, more or less at the same time even.
Yeah, that's right, Eva. I mean, I think you're right in saying, if we've got a global problem, we need a global solution. Yeah, I think there's four big areas of cooperation that we could do with the US, between the EU and the US. I mean, first is really right here in the space that NIS2 is in, which is resiliency of critical infrastructure. And now I think, frankly, that we should, both the US and the EU should be promoting out to the rest of the world and encouraging the use of internationally recognized standards in this space, right? Because I think that the US and the EU approach is actually very similar here. It's both based on, risk-based, process-oriented framework. And NIS has actually done the job of mapping the work of NIS2 to the NIST framework on the US side. A second piece, I think, is around investment. I mean, just before this got started in the session, we were talking about the Irish attacks and whether you can really solve everything through policy or whether we have to look beneath that and see what the investments that have been made actually are. We both have a great opportunity on both sides of the Atlantic right now. We've got the Resilience and Recovery Fund in the EU. We have the $2 trillion investment spending fund, which is happening in the US. And both of them are very focused on digital. But I think when we need to think about the digital transition, it does sit on a foundation of security, right? And that's not just in the critical infrastructure space where we have this, expanding attack surface. It's the mundane. It's us in our home offices right now. We've lost this enterprise perimeter that you can defend, and we need to think about the technologies and the security solutions that help us work in this hybrid workspace. A third area, I think, is around skills. And we did a survey with our customers, and 70% of them, and bear in mind, these are, enterprise customers with talent development programs and are able to attract a lot of talent. 70% say they're affected by the cyber skills shortage that we have, right? And we're doing our bit as a company to try and plug that. I mean, we actually trained 600,000 students last year in one of our 5 cyber courses alone. But I think we need to figure out, this is an issue that plagues both Europe and the US. And I think jointly sitting down and trying to figure that out and what we can do to improve that is extraordinarily important. And finally, I would say it's about going after the bad guys, because I think we see a lot of those in common, whether it's on the criminal side or on the rogue state side. I mean, our CEO, Chuck Robbins, was at RSA conference yesterday, and he said something which really stuck, which is that if cybercrime losses were an economy in their own right, they would be the 3rd largest economy in the world. $6 trillion in dollars in losses from cybercrime. And when you think about it in that space, you have to say, okay, we have to do something about this. And I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of operational and legal cooperation between the EU and the US there. And I think there's more work to be done and a common approach on the rules for the road for nation states too, right? We've seen the work happening in the UN and the different groups. We've seen the work happening from Paris Call. It's a long slog, but it's a very important one.
Thanks a lot. I mean, this makes me also think, what better can we do in terms of information exchange between member states? And Johan, I mean, here, where do you see the challenges, both in the proposal, but also, I very often hear, some members saying we prefer not to exchange information because we are not sure once we exchange information what happens to that information. So in a way, some actors think of cybersecurity that sometimes it means shielding from another rather than exchanging information. So what can we do in that domain? And also, what can we learn, for example, from the latest attack against the Irish healthcare system? Because one thing is about communicating with one another between member states, but another thing is learning from one another and how we can be better.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to start with the latter, and actually I would like to really commend the Irish authorities who have been very forthcoming and have shared the relevant information at the technical and operational level with their European partners. So this is something that we see as a very positive outcome of the current NIS framework, that we really have a system in place, and we have over the years, of course, created trust, enough trust so that this type of operational information can be shared. Is it enough? I mean, it always depends on where you sit. And of course, I think when it comes to operational information, there is always caveats involved. So we are far away from an ideal system, but I think the elements are there that we can share information between the different layers, be it a technical, operational, political layer, or different sectors as well. Yes, it can be made better. But I think people make this mistake believing that sharing information is only about the situational awareness. So let's say the information that is necessary to respond to cyber crisis. It's not only that. It is also about the lessons learned, the experiences of building capacities. It's about understanding cybersecurity threat landscape. So this kind of sharing of information is also very important. And we saw that when we did the European risk assessment on 5G, how important that was to feed into the thinking of the member states of what would be the mitigating actions and measures that we should undertake. And that's also something that I would like to commend in the NIS2 framework. The Commission has put the proposal to develop a cybersecurity index in this. I would say this is also about information sharing. It's a different type of information, but it's information that is necessary, because cybersecurity is not only about operational issues, it's also about the policy frameworks, it's about capacity building, but the skills, it's about how the market operates. All these things also need to be shared, and this is something that all member states can learn from. What are the gaps? What are the issues that they could focus on? So having this kind of a benchmarking system doesn't mean that we need to benchmark, but having a system which enables to share information in a comparable manner is very, very valuable. And I think we should not focus only on the operational part of the information sharing, though it is important. If you allow me one thing regarding the issue of the new framework that we are now or the Parliament starts to discuss together with the member states, I think a lot of emphasis has been put on the fact that the scope is now widening, that there are new sectors, that the entities that will be involved, they are, as Kuba says, it multiplies by thousands or hundreds, let's say. It's also very important that we look at the deepening elements of the new framework. So it's not about just widening the scope, it's also about the deepening of the scope. This is what Chris said when he said, if you look at the ways how the directive has been implemented in member states, it's a patchwork. So there needs to be much more effort in ensuring some sort of harmonized approach there as well. And I think we ran last year a study with 250 essential service providers in 5 biggest markets, member states, and more than 40% of them said that it's not clear what is required of them under the current NIS directive. And I think it's a signal. It's a signal that we need a bit of a rethink. And if we talk about this Irish incident, the entities that are now under attack fall within the NIS. So I think, of course, there is a lessons learned process, and we need to see what happened and why it happened, etc. But it looks like these are the entities that, under the NIS, under the European rules, they should be the most ready to deal with these types of incidents. and still the perpetrators were successful. So there is a lessons learned moment, not only for the particular entities who were under attack, but for everybody, because this kind of attack is cross-border and wide scale. This kind of an attack vector will be used and shall be used also in the future in other sectors. So everybody has something to learn from this.
Thank you very much, and I hope today's discussion will also make us more knowledgeable. And some of us have to be focusing on preparing and crafting amendments in the next couple of days would also keep that in mind. But not only, because we have today representatives also from member states, not just the Euro-Brussels bubble, so to say, group. And we already have a couple of questions in the chat, which I will address to all of you in a minute. But we have two impulse reactions, one coming from the side of SMEs, the digital SMEs angle, and one coming from the institutional side. So I'll first go to the institutions. We have with us Mr. Simonski, he's Deputy Chairman of the e-Government State Agency in Bulgaria, who would like to give a little bit of his views on the topic, and I think he would probably have some questions to the panelists. I just wanted to fit in there that we invited him to share a little bit of the public authorities seen as essential entities and his experience with that, because Bulgaria had included this sector back in 2018 in a way going a step further than what the first NIS directive was asking for. So, Mr. Simonski, the floor is yours for a brief intervention.
I also
you should
listen.
Just unmute.
Well, I think it should work now. It's done centrally. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I listened very carefully to the distinguished speakers, and to be fair, I enjoyed their sharing of opinion on the new NIS directive. I represent here member states and actually those players in this game who have to implement, and actually after the NIS2 directive is in place, then it's the member states' turn to implement this and turn it into reality. And as you said, and also in line with what Johan said about NIS directive, that we should look 5 years from now, because more or less this is the time frame of the directive to go into real implementation. And I may share our experience with including public administration into the game, and it was pretty successful and gave us a lot of feedback also on how we should approach the rest of the sectors. I have my comment on sectorial or central approach, and it's might be a little different, but overall, working with public administration demonstrated that if you go extreme in your requirements, if you include all incident reporting, etc., sometimes it's even easier, and sometimes it's not ambiguous and does not raise any issues that need to be further clarified, or those interinstitutional games, because we all understand that cybersecurity is the largest disruptor now in the digital world. We're talking about digital transformation, but looking at cybersecurity, it really disrupts even organizations at all their levels, starting from small organizations up to the nation-wide organizations. And in this sense, we should look very carefully and being really realistic in the ambition, realistic in the scope, because at the end, that all should be well implemented and be in full effect. Not up, and I support that, and I think all member states agree with that. Ambition should be high. Ambition should be high because as we look in the future, 5 years from now, if we are reactive but not proactive, then we run into problems to follow the hackers and always being behind them, which is not the case. I think everybody would look at. Several now talking about reflection of what all you said. One was about the trust. And actually, we should look at the trust from different perspectives and also decompose the trust into the different relations that may exist. So talking, and actually this is outcome of the first version of the NIS directive, G2G trust. I think there is great accomplishment there. The network of CSERTs, the cooperation group, all other things. Even if you want the discussions in the council, in the cyber group on the cyber issues, all this talks about trust between governments to government. Talking though, when business is involved, this is where the gap needs to be filled. It's business to government, it's business to business, and then we should take into account that business has different roles. We have representative of solution providers as business, but we have the business, as customer, and this is another case that requires different attention. Another thing, it's also related with what Johan said, to look 5 years ahead. It's, well, in business, it's time to market. Here, it's time to implementation or time to be in full effect. And the previous experience with NIS directive, the previous version, as Johan mentioned, 6 years. That's something that that we should start thinking. I mean, after we implement this NIS directive, we should start probably with the next one, and so on and so on. But the good thing about this one is that ambition and scope is really that high that 5 years from now, if we have this organization, if we involve all those players, at least we have the ground to be that dynamic into the changes. Here it was mentioned JCU, which is something really interesting, an initiative for a country like Bulgaria. I find this really great. And to be supportive of our efforts to help us, because we cannot develop the same capacity as the big countries. For instance, it's issue of investment, it's issue of human resources, it's issue of understanding, if you want. And in this sense, such unit certainly would be of help to countries like ours, and that's supported. On the relations with the United States, I think Europe is going that way, sort of federated organization, and kind of bringing all countries together like in a federated organization. And I'll bring again the motto that we had during our presidency: stronger together. And that's what is happening in the European Union. And I think the NIS directive is the right way to go there. And finally, the scope about the sectorial approach or nationwide approach. We have more advantages to say about the national approach. So if we have CERT-centric organization and national CERT-centric organization, it used to work in our case. Going through the sectors, that requires additional cascade organization that sometimes the second echelon, the second level, is not that well prepared or does not have the necessary investments and understanding and priority that need to be there. So that might be considered. And let's not forget that cybersecurity is technology as well. It's really something that we should realize. And when technology meets organization, then the glue should be very, very strong, and they should match each other. That's from me.
Thank you.
Great discussion.
Thanks, Mr. Simonski. We will move now for one other short impulse statement by James Philpott from the Digital SME Alliance. James, we've heard SMEs mentioned a number of times. and they're, of course, an essential part, not just of the European economy, but also when it comes to the tech sector and the whole ecosystem of making sure that we have a robust cybersecurity in place. So could you please, in about 2 minutes, give us your insights up until now in the discussion? And then there's a number of questions we'll be addressing from the audience, and again, hearing from our 3 distinguished panelists. So James.
Sure. So thank you very much for the invite to join you today. European Digital SME Alliance represents small and medium companies in the European digital sector. And these are companies that we describe as the front runners and developers. So they're creating and applying the new technologies and services. So firstly, with related to the new directive or the updated directive, we would like to acknowledge and welcome the explicit exclusion for small and micro companies, obviously with certain exceptions. But this does help reduce the burden for new and smaller companies, and it's not so prohibitive to help them develop. It's been mentioned a few times that the directive is widening in the scope, and so obviously that means more companies are going to be affected, and so this is going to require more support. But the fact that it's already on the radar means that the level of support and the effort to go into this doesn't seem like it's going to be underestimated, so that's a good thing for us. The supply chain risk assessment was mentioned as well. That's something that we acknowledge can help level up Europe's cybersecurity, but we are a bit wary of the possibility that it can sort of lead to companies maybe having to indirectly comply or at least demonstrate that they have knowledge of the directive and its provisions. We understand that it's only prescriptive, this measure, but it could end up being advantageous in a business sense to be able to demonstrate how your company is able to comply or not when you're engaging with companies and offering services and products to companies that are affected by the directive. And this could potentially disproportionately affect and penalize smaller and micro enterprises, as because they don't have the capacity to really assess themselves and ensure that they are in line with all of the measures in the directive. And so, especially related to the larger competitors. So if there are any precautions or lessons that can be adopted from the 5G assessment, this would be very welcome. Thirdly, harmonization between member states has been mentioned several times, and this is something we're very much in favor of, particularly related to the reporting of vulnerabilities and incidents, and also for the voluntary scheme for entities that are outside the scope. This would be very welcome as well. Just to have clear and transparent thresholds and requirements that when they are aligned, it makes it easier so that the reporting remains proportionate, and it's easy for the companies that are affected to know what, when, and to whom they should disclose information, and also where, in which jurisdiction, because with cross-border services becoming more and more prevalent, understanding which jurisdiction you need to report to is a key fact. Another quick issue on the topic of harmonization. So the Cybersecurity Act potentially relies on standards for the schemes that it uses. And then this directive also allows member states to make cybersecurity schemes mandatory as well. And these are also based on standards. So in this case, using similar or shared standards and schemes will be more efficient. But a larger concern from our part is that standards are not a tool that are well suited to SMEs, given that their cost and the complexity involved in implementing them is quite high. So finally, just to sum up, we do believe and agree that this is a very good opportunity to level up European cybersecurity and also promote a security by design approach that will benefit both supply side and demand side SMEs if there's sufficient support and resources available for the implementation. So the directive does contain the obligation for policy support to SMEs by national authorities, which we do welcome. And we'd like to suggest that this also be harmonized across borders, not just to ensure fair market conditions and fair access to support, but also so that there are no weak links in European cybersecurity. And we have seen that there are methods out there and ways of doing this that are successful. So, for example, SME-specific guides to certification and standardization. We developed a guide to ISO 27001, which is very popular. So there is a market there for support in this way. We've seen vouchers for access to support services and awareness campaigns all have a positive effect on the awareness of SMEs to help them better understand and implement the actions that will be required of them. So thank you very much, and yeah, any questions, happy to answer.
Thanks a lot, James. Thanks to both of you, actually. We have about 20 minutes until we wrap up. And I would invite now our distinguished panelists to comment on some of the questions, but also if while you comment on the questions, if you have reactions to the imposed statements, please feel free to merge them in your interventions. I will start with two questions. There's the first one, perhaps for the Commission, so to Kuba and to Johan, and it fits into something I wanted to raise about the scope. Basically, how can we make it more operational for all actors and more implementable as well? Looking at the attack on Colonial Pipeline, do you think that the NIS2 requires energy companies and other key infrastructures to improve security beyond the NIS requirements? You should unmute Kuba. Yeah.
I'm just super concerned because my high-tech piece of equipment is not charging. So in case you lose me, I will restart from another device. But actually, in terms of oil pipelines, this is clearly covered. It's not covered even by NIS2, but it's firmly within the scope of NIS1. So, of course, there is a small detail because we, as the Commission, do not have precise knowledge which oil pipelines in Europe are in the scope of the directive, because with this whole sort of aura of national security, you know, this information so far has been considered confidential. With NIS2, it would be a different approach. Basically, any oil pipeline which is above small enterprise, which I would presume would probably cover most of them, would be in the scope. So that's, let's say, from a kind of generic perspective. Obviously, details are super important. So what these companies do in practice, you know, so on the one hand, one has to look into the support that is given to the companies to do the right thing. But also, of course, there has to be a serious supervision and enforcement, you know, and by serious supervision and enforcement, I don't mean only just like a punitive measure, but it's important that national cybersecurity authorities in charge, they have a proper dialogue, you know, with the companies in scope. So I'm pretty sure that what has happened on the East Coast is definitely a food for thought for many companies in Europe who are, let's say, I would hope they're basically reviewing their let's say, companies' policies from the point of view of how this type of incident can be avoided.
I know you didn't. Would you like to join in, or
I mean,
Chris, perhaps you want to?
I can. I mean, I would essentially repeat what Kuba said. So maybe Chris wants to add.
Yeah, sorry, that's my fault. I've ruined the flow by jumping in when I wasn't invited. No, I was just going to say, I think one of the interesting things that came out of the Colonial Pipeline was it wasn't actually an attack against the operational control systems, right? So it's not really about the convergence of IT and OT. So in that sense, you know, what we know, we don't know that many of the details, but what we do know is that they essentially shut off their own IT systems, and as a result, you know, closed down the operations on the pipeline, and that was to contain the spread of the ransomware. So presumably, you know, and this is a lot of getting ahead of what we know so far, but presumably some of the stuff that they could have done is things that are applicable across the board against ransomware. So thinking about it from a technology point of view, you know, preventing phishing, network segmentation, zero trust architecture. So if you get an attack in one part of the network, they can't easily get across to the next and aren't authenticated inside the perimeter. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of lessons from Colonial Pipeline and from the other ransomware attacks here. But I think, you know, you can see that they do fit in the framework of NIS2, but it's not just the policy level that matters. It's also the types of technologies and getting up to date with modern cybersecurity approaches that matters.
If I may, I mean, there's also one question regarding this. I mean, like, would the new NIS2 also encompass incident reporting requirements for incidents that might have been potentially problematic? And why this is important is precisely because of this lessons learned moment. That we do have this in place, not for operational reasons, but actually for the reasons that Kuba mentioned, that it provides a kind of a regular dialogue between the national cybersecurity authorities and the essential entities or service providers now, to constantly reevaluate whether the measures that they have taken are adequate and do actually mitigate enough the risks or not. So I think this kind of an element of constant self-learning or constant reflection is so ingrained now and cannot just be focused on simply, large-scale cross-border incidents. They really need to be focused on all the company policies and the policies of the essential entities when it comes to the policies that they put in place in terms of ensuring that their services are cyber secure.
Thanks a lot. I think we've answered right away through your intervention some of the questions that were posed by the participants. But there is a number of questions when it comes to security provisions. Article 40 and 41 of the ESCC will be replaced by NIS2. And what about the regulatory certainty for ECS, ECNs, and the need for guidance from the Commission on that, Kuba? That's probably something you get quite a bit in various discussions, but it appears here as well.
Okay, so very briefly, I mean, we did quite a thorough analysis, before deciding to include the telecoms, I mean, the electronic communication providers in the scope of NIS. I mean, from our perspective, I mean, really, first of all, it's important to remember that it was the telecom sector that was the pioneer. The cybersecurity measures were for the first time introduced in the Telecom Framework Directive, which was then inspiration for NIS1. What we are constructing, we believe, is a rather smooth transfer of these provisions to NIS2. We notably stress in the recitals that the practice of implementation so far can be definitely continued. We are definitely not telling member states that they should replace current supervisory authority with another authority. It's the freedom of member states. They can continue the business so far. And most importantly, we are moving forward. That means, for example, that if one would really like to defend status quo, that would mean that, those, from our perspective, sensible measures, such as more clarity about the essence of reporting requirements, the measures on supply chain security, this idea of reporting significant cyber threats, which, by the way, in the context of negotiations, I think is getting also an interest in the context of the financial of DORA. So all of this, I think, makes a lot of sense, that if you want NIS2 to be a strong horizontal regulation, that it definitely should cover telecom sector. And very interestingly, actually, the companies themselves are in favor, and for a good reason, because they often offer services that are covered today by the code and by NIS2, and it makes a lot of sense to bring this together.
Thank you very much. Looking at the questions that keep on coming, there are again some quite concrete ones, but perhaps towards Chris, and if again maybe Kuba would want to come in. There's a question from the Chief Administration of Viskils Malta Foundation. What efforts are being made by software and hardware providers and the Commission to ensure that products are developed secure by design? Does it mean that defaults are secure and changed before them being used? Would any of you be willing to jump on that one? Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, happily. I mean, to be honest, when I think about secure by design, I would go a little bit beyond secure by default and just the settings you have at the end, the end user. Although there is some interesting work that's gone on in that space, including particularly on IoT labels and work of Charter of Trust. I mean, for us, when we think secure by design, we think about the whole software development lifecycle. We've actually had a secure process in doing that we have roots back to 2002. We've been doing it since 2009 formally, called our secure development lifecycle. And it's about basically having a repeatable, measurable, secure development that you can have the same build and show the same process again and again. It's a lot of work. It's not something that happens overnight. You have to build it up. But it's something that we fundamentally believe in, and that goes along the full life cycle of our product, including how we deal with vulnerabilities that emerge during the process. I mean, if I think about this from the government side of view, though, rather than what the vendors out there are doing, I mean, it's clear that there is focus around secure development. We do for certain governments, like in France or in Germany, where they do the source code review with BSI and ANSI, and also looking at other IP. I think it's an area that's going to become even larger, though. I mean, if you look at the US's response to SolarWinds and what's going on there in the federal states, there's a lot of focus now on their procurement rules under the new executive order around software development. And I think it's kind of a natural space to go to as a result of supply chain attacks. Like, because you have to better understand what goes into your hardware, what goes into your software. Because, you know, you think, this software that's created by Cisco. Well, it's not, right? I mean, there's all kinds of components which come in from different authors along the lines. And trying to understand that, get a hang of it, knowing that you can trust your suppliers, is definitely a very hot topic in the industry.
I would just, if I may, very briefly add to that, we definitely reach a stage that, apart from noble action by the vendors and manufacturers, you know, those who definitely take care of their reputation, I mean, the stakes are so high that indeed moving to the next stage, that is regulating, is something that is definitely being reflected. When you ask me, Eva, about these two priorities under whatever the priorities of my favorite topics under strategy, I indeed mentioned this idea of horizontal rules on cybersecurity, and definitely software is part of the reflection in that context. What type of generic rules on secure software developments throughout the whole life cycle one could actually indeed support with the regulation. And clearly also the cybersecurity certification is yet another tool, but none of this is a silver bullet, of course, because, you know, there are clearly certain limitations, especially that the field is so dynamic.
And Kuba, while I'm at you, there's a direct and concrete question again on concrete recital, recital 56. Basically, we know that it includes, as also Jochen Michels, who's head of public affairs here for Kaspersky, is mentioning, it includes good points to simplify or to streamline reporting requests by EU law burdens for companies. But he's asking, why is this not reflected in the articles? You know, would you comment on that one? I guess he's also giving food for thought to the parliamentarians here also.
Absolutely. Yeah, you see, we are, you know, we are careful. I mean, the idea is certainly fully supported by us. After thorough analysis, we have basically doubts whether we can actually really amend through operative provisions, you know, other legal acts in the NIS. That we thought that it would require a little bit of more further work. That is why it's in the recital, you know. But I mean, there is clearly an intention to go in this direction, and you know, there are things that could be done from our perspective without necessarily changing, you know, regulation itself. It's about somehow technical facilitation of reporting that which would not interfere with responsibilities, with competences of different authorities, etc. But this is something that we definitely see as an important priority.
If I may add on this, I mean, the agency has done very good work together with the member states, you know, that you just put in place like common practices regarding incident reporting that helps. And I mean, as Kuba said, not everything needs to be regulated for this to happen. But it helps if we have some caveats and milestones or principles in the regulation that help to streamline this.
There's also a reference to what you've said earlier when you spoke about governments need a clear view of the threat landscape. So the question to you is, should we make threat intel sharing of information a specific task for computer security incident response teams? Would you have a comment on that? And then we are shortly running out of time. I'll probably bring 2 more questions in, or 1 more question, and we'll have to wrap it up. Even though I have to say I enjoy that we are getting so many questions at our expert panel today.
I think this is a question, the last question that you raised is also something that is very pertinent to the joint cyber units, and this idea of creating a framework where you could develop common situational awareness, but also a common understanding of the threats. So I think I don't like to put everything, all the eggs in the basket of the NIS directive, but I also see that the Commission has made a proposal to institutionalize the Cyclone network, and I think that's an excellent way how we can do that. And that's not a technical level in the CSIRT community, but it's really an operational level. And this is really the level where this common understanding of the threat is important. So I think the proposal already makes a step to this direction. Let's see how it will be developed.
Thanks a lot. I would pose 1 more question, and we'll see how we're doing with time. It's a little bit more of a broad question, but I particularly like it because it brings industry and the different sectors within our economy, and as a member of the ITRE committee, that's obviously a soft spot for me. So the question comes from Capgemini and their director, Roland de Koning. Could you please reflect on the need for European cooperation between the different and various sectors of industry, and most importantly, the need to exchange information when it comes to the lessons learned, risks? We, in a way, a little bit exchanged views on that, but I don't think it was so much, focused on the industries themselves, the different industries themselves. Who would like to come in? Okay.
Well, maybe I can just say that there is no single way of doing it. Huh? So I mean, we talk about this, that cybersecurity is something that is in a horizontal dimension throughout the different sectors, but it's also a horizontal dimension through different approaches. And when, for example, when we now talk about the new cybersecurity competence center network, so we're talking about the research and innovation funding and the investment that go there. There is a community that is clearly involved, and of course the community is at the same time the community that we deal with when it comes to ensuring ICT products, processes, and services that they are cyber secure. So some of these overlaps, some of it doesn't. I think what is important that we do find ourselves in a situation whereby more and more these communities talk to each other, whereby we synergize these interactions, and hopefully that also leads to the lessons learned process. So this is not something that we haven't undertook. Yeah, it is a constantly evolving ecosystem and constantly evolving outreach towards these communities at different levels in the different corners. And in the end of the day, we hope that this is a kind of an evolutionary process. There is no single big parliament of all cybersecurity actors in Europe. There are very many parliaments, and it's important that these different parliaments talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just jump in on that, I was being a bit polite, but to be honest, I'd like to say that on an optimistic note. I mean, there's always more that can be done, but let's not underestimate what's already been done in our communities, which are out there, whether it's, the threat researchers sharing information about threat indicators, whether it's the PCERTs, working together and coordinating for vulnerabilities that go across multiple different types of vendors, or whether, frankly, it's at this policy level where we also have those discussions and try to understand from a political point of view So I think, you know, it's a great question, and it's something that we always have to keep on top of. But there's no need to be to underestimate what's already going on.
Thanks, Chris. Because I'm conscious not just of time, but also of the battery of Kuba, I think we should wrap up. And I think Kuba should go first with kind of just a few sentences of concluding remarks. What would be your encouragement? Like, what would be your ideal scenario in the next 5 years in terms of cooperation, in terms of us concluding the work on the NIS2? What are your thoughts? What would make you sleep well at night and not to worry as much as probably the past couple of months made me worry, for example, seeing all this attacks happening on European soil?
Well, I would say that it is indeed thinking that what we construct now should make sense 5-10 years from now. I would hope that we will manage to make a big progress without going through a cyber pandemic, you know. So we definitely now will be making great move in terms of Europe's preparedness to health crisis because of what we have experienced collectively. And my hope would be that we, even without the crisis of that proportion in the cyber domain, you know, we can make really a real progress. So again, from that point of view, I've definitely encouraged everyone to remember we are not fixing things for now, but we are fixing things which should be relevant 5-10 years from now, whether it's scope, whether it's the scope of reporting, whether it's the link with certification. I'm picking on some specific points, but let's think not just for now, but for the future, especially that what we agree, for example, in NIS2 will effectively become reality on the ground only 3 years from now. That's the length of European legislative cycle. So this is another reason why we should be bold. Thanks.
Thank you. I like your ending. It's kind of part of my work as maybe to always strive for more and to sometimes, when necessary, do it in a bold manner to make sure we're better prepared for the future. Johan and then Chris and I will try to provide a very brief wrap up.
Thank you. We have a saying in NISA that cybersecurity is a common responsibility, but I think that should not be used as a weak leaf for actors who have a key role in this to not have the responsibility that they need to undertake. And I think this is something that we need to look also in the NIS2 context. Who are the responsible actors, and whether their responsibility in the current framework is clear enough for them also to take cybersecurity seriously. Because let's be honest, in this plethora of essential service providers, their main business is to produce energy, heal people, make sure that transport runs. The cybersecurity is not number one of their concerns. So the key question for us is, how can we make them think cybersecure in a cybersecure manner and invest in cybersecurity whilst their real business is somewhere else?
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think in cybersecurity, we tend to think about, you know, people, process, and technology. So if I put it in those buckets, I think on the process side, I think the work that we're doing with NIS and the international standards out there are really going to help people to sit down and think and take these issues through and work them through and take them seriously. I think on technology, I think we all hope that we deal with a less complex environment in terms of the cybersecurity vendor space. And that we can drive some of the important trends which are going to be out there. So simplicity, automation, and the move to cloud. And I think in people, we need a user base which is more cyber savvy, and we need professionals that can really do the right thing and push through and integrate us on cyber. And my hope is if you pull all those together, that we can finally get a step ahead of the malicious actors which are out there.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. I'm glad to see that my AirPods are still you know at 5% Kuba, but they're still working. It seems like it's the same with your device. So we're still there, and I would.
Yeah.
But I'm also glad to know that so many participants joined us today, and thank you very much for finding this discussion relevant. Perhaps in about 30 seconds, my wrap up and key takeaways, even though I think the panelists summed it up perfectly. I would be, you know, one of those partners and actors to continue working towards common understanding of threats, common ways to work together, to cooperate with our key allies, especially when it comes to investments, when it comes to skills, and most importantly, when it comes to tackling attacks together. That's why I think it's important to hear and know what is being done within our community, within the ecosystem as a whole. And looking ahead, it would be very important to make sure that the elements we're about to lay today and in the next days and months ahead of us in the new proposal can indeed stand the test of time. So hopefully when one day we meet again, we would know that even if we might not have managed to put in the mindset of institutions or businesses, and perhaps that shouldn't even be the aim to think cybersecurity first, at least it could be one of these key 3 to 5 priorities that the different stakeholders could think about when they're working on their strategies to make their systems better prepared, more resilient, and of course, better secure. So thank you all. It's been a pleasure to hosting today's discussion, and I look forward to our future cooperation. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.